of Peeq Pro. Peeq was started about 6 years ago by two optometrists in the Omaha area. A lot of the reason behind the starting was that they were concerned about eyelid hygiene and that patients weren't necessarily getting their eyes completely clean. To that end, we developed a new device called the Peeq Wava and started working with optometry offices around the country. What we found during that conversation with folks was that there was a need for more than just the device, that thinking about how to do compliance and compliance more broadly around dry eye, around myopia management, around a variety of things was a necessary thing. And doing some education of sharing best practices from optometry clinic to optometry clinic. So to that end, we're starting a webinar series. Tonight is our first webinar. One of the things that I have discovered as somebody who's not an optometrist and didn't necessarily spend my career in the optometry space is there's a lot that you can learn from different optometrists. And one of the places we've found the most learning as Peeq is from folks that have just recently started their practices. So tonight we have Kyle Niemann. Kyle is an optometrist who practices in Omaha, Nebraska. He actually went to the same university that I did, Creighton University, and then graduated from Nova in Florida a couple of years ago. He started Visualize Omaha, and he's going to tell us a little bit about some of the things that he does. And I, as the host, am not, I want to be clear, my goal is not to sell you on Peeq tonight. My goal is to sell you on Kyle really knowing what he's doing and doing interesting things. So we're going to kind of hand it off to him and let him just sort of talk about the things that he's doing. So Kyle, before we get going, would you like to provide a little bit more of an introduction about who you are, how you got started, things of that nature?
Yeah, I'll go ahead and get started here too. And thanks for the kind words, Tom. Appreciate it as well too. It's been nice at least working with you here. But anyway, yeah, so a little bit about myself. Obviously, I am pretty young looking here too. So at least graduated optometry school just 2 years ago from Nova Southeastern. Went to Creighton University for undergrad, and I was actually a Spanish major there. And that will play at least a little bit more kind of a role here, at least in some of these other questions that we're going to at least tackle here today too. But anyway, yeah, so that's at least kind of a basic background about myself. Born and raised here in Omaha. At least when I got done with school in Florida, kind of knew that I always wanted to come back here as well too. So at least with my family, my mom is an optician, and she is my optician at my clinic as well too. So at least kind of that last year of optometry school, I had a couple discussions with her and said, hey, do you want to be my optician? Would you look into maybe moving from where you're at as well too? And she said, yep, absolutely. You don't even need to ask me about that. So that's kind of funny, but figured, hey, might as well at least ask her there too. And yeah, so at least for the last couple years, we've cold started a practice here, Visualize Optical. We're kind of more central based here, at least in Omaha, which is a little bit nicer with a lot more offices going up in West Omaha too. So at least to kind of dominate this area here. Kind of more about myself as well too. Don't have any brothers, don't have any sisters or anything. So it's just me. So kind of gotten a lot of interactions, at least with friends growing up, and talking with a lot more adults, just because I was around them a lot more as well. But anyway, yeah, I mean, we've been doing pretty well here for the last couple years. The lights aren't off yet, so that's definitely a positive right there as well too. And yeah, we started bringing on Peeq, I would say, probably a couple months, maybe about 5-6 months ago or so. And this was something that always interested me, at least in optometry school. And then just as I was practicing, especially in my last couple of years, where I started noticing that dry eye was a whole lot more common than really what you see nowadays too. I don't think really the COVID pandemic has helped out a lot. Obviously, we're doing a lot more screen time. We're not blinking. One thing I always try to share with my patients and find it somewhat interesting is saying, hey, you blink about 20 times per minute normally when you're not using a digital device. That goes all the way down to 4. And at least to see the reactions from some patients there too is kind of surprising there, where they don't even recognize that. And that's one recommendation I make a lot too, is I say, hey, this may sound like a crazy recommendation, but if you're doing phone or screen work or anything longer than an hour, take a 2-3 minute break right there. You need your eyes to get a little break. You need to reset that to your film there as well too, and get kind of that crisp, consistent vision as well. But anyway, yeah, I mean, that's at least kind of a background about our practice there too. I would say I probably really got involved in optometry, at least with just my mom's influence there, where I actually want to be the dentist for the longest time. decided, hey, I don't want to look in people's disgusting mouths or anything else like that. So then I said, hey, these smartphones can't be good for us either. So not only are they not good for nearsightedness, but dry eye also we're getting a tons of that as well too. But yeah, I mean, just kind of a basic overview right there. I would say the one thing that at least makes our clinic unique is, to my knowledge, we're one of Omaha's very few bilingual clinics. So I was a Spanish major at Creighton. That was one thing that Tom and I at least were kind of discussing before we hopped on this call here, is he said, hey, so like, you weren't a science major or anything? And I was like, no, I mean, I did get an extra degree at Nova. They decided to give us an extra degree there, at least with all the hard work that we did. But yeah, I took all my other classes just as electives, and it's been good, at least for the Omaha community. And that's been one thing that's at least been unique about our practice, is being able to provide that care, whether it's in English or in Spanish, and having patients feel really comfortable that they now have an eye doctor that they can go to and converse with and talk with them about their family, talk with them about any other issues they may have going on as well too.
Cool. I'm going to ask a question here. You're relatively young, and one of the things that we've noticed at Peeq is that you, cold started your practice, but then you have some unique business practices. How much of that is stuff you learned in school? How much of that is just things you're like, yeah, this seems to work? Talk a little bit about the cold starting process and things that you do.
So yeah, I mean, a lot of my classmates for sure looked at me and they're like, you're crazy. Like, do you know what you're getting yourself into? And I'll be honest, I mean, I would say I probably knew maybe about 50, 60, 70% of the stuff that I was getting myself into. And in terms of the other 30%, I'm just fortunate where I've had two parents that had started their own businesses as well too. So having them at least as a backbone has been nice to run questions off them as well too. But yeah, in terms of schooling, that's one thing at least Nova didn't really do a good job of. There was a private practice club, but when it came to managing financials, figuring out how you're getting credentialed with insurances, figuring out how you're going to get your vendors to communicate with you, there's not really much practice that was kind of given, at least hands-on in school there. I think I was fortunate enough, at least where my two internships where I worked at, they let you have a lot of autonomy. So I try to at least take advantage of that, ask at least the optometrist that had owned the clinic, a bunch more business questions too, just to kind of pick their mind too. But yeah, I mean, that is one thing that I think is kind of at least unique for myself, is that I have at least two parents that have an experience. Granted, one of them isn't in the eye care industry and one of them is in the eye care industry, but still any sort of that business knowledge right there has always been beneficial for us.
That makes sense. So I have two different questions. I'm gonna let you pick your path. Would you rather talk about having your mom as your optician, or would you rather talk about having a bilingual clinic? Because I think both are interesting, and having your family involved in your business is really, I think a lot of the people on the call, as well as just generally in optometry, have family tied into their businesses. So I'd be curious how you thought about it, but then I also want to go back over to the bilingual nature. So pick your path.
So yeah, let's hit at least the family side here first. So as much as I thought it would be all easy and everything, there definitely have been some difficult times. And it's pretty tough sometimes too, where I'm not fortunate enough, at least yet, where I have my own place to live. So my parents are nice enough, at least letting me live there. So a lot of times I kind of bring business home. Sometimes it's tough to do that. Other times it's great, especially when business is going well. But yeah, I mean, at least the dynamic is nice. And not only that, but with my mom and with her experience, I have a good trusty optician. And that is one thing that a lot of other docs that I talked with, at least just as I was going through school, is they said, hey, you want to make sure you have a good optician, because they can be a rock star for you, where they can solve a lot of issues that you may not know what's going on. They can at least calm patients down if their prescription isn't in on time or anything. So yeah, having that good kind of dynamic and trustworthiness, at least of someone that I know I can trust, and be my mom, has been really easy to get anything done, at least around the clinic. So if there's something I need kind of her to kind of at least start doing a little bit more, saying, hey, can you maybe start helping out with pre-testing the patients a little bit more? Can you start helping out with confirming insurance information as well? So yeah, I mean, kind of it has its trade-offs, and then it has its negatives there as well too.
It's interesting because you and I have spent some time, and I remember the first time I was talking to you, you were talking about having to figure out some of the logistics for insurance, just the literal, how do I bill this to a new insurance company? How do I make sure I'm an approved vendor? How do I make sure, all of these provider related questions? I think, at least as an outsider, I don't necessarily think of those as part of the business starting process. So I mean, good job. I want to ask us, we're gonna hold on the bilingual question. Next question is going to be associated with what you've learned cold starting. So you've been in a couple other practices. I know that you sub into some practices. I know that you've worked with the VA. I know you've done all sorts of stuff. What are some of the things that you see that people don't do as much as they should, or ideas that you're like, hey, as a new person with new eyes coming into this, here's the thing I do that most people don't, even though I've seen it done that way a bunch of other times?
Yeah, I mean, I think at least with us, with it just being a cold start clinic, we have a lot of time to spend with the patient. And I think that goes a really, really long way. Obviously, when you're at those more established patients, you've got a set number of minutes that you can at least spend with the patient. So at least getting to know the patients has been one thing that's been at least a good practice builder, because then they actually get to understand who you are as an individual more so than just a doctor. And they can refer at least their friends out to you if they say, hey, he's a good guy right here. He was talking to me about my family, asking me about what I was doing on the weekend. Just a bunch of other stuff like that as well too. So yeah, and not only that, but I mean, I think one other thing too, especially more like dry eye related, is I use sodium fluoresceine on all of my patients. And that is one diagnostic tool that I just feel like not all offices use. And it's really, really powerful. For example, I had a patient today. I was checking her out, and, it was doing the autorefractor. You could see at least that her Myers got a little distorted there. But looking on the health of the front part of her eye, which is white light without any sodium fluoresceine, I totally would have missed it. Would have just said, all right, hey, yeah, just take a couple more breaks, get some, resetting of your tear film. I put the sodium fluoresceine in there, and let me tell you, those tears were evaporating in 2-3 seconds there. Just not good quality, not good coverage of her tears. And one thing that's at least been helpful for us, I actually learned this from an internal medicine doctor of all people to learn. And I met him at a Hispanic Chamber of Commerce meeting. But what he had told me is, he said, the power of pictures is extremely important. And a lot of times with those patients, I just pull up a picture of a normal cornea with sodium fluoresceine in there versus what theirs is looking like. A lot of times it's tough to kind of find a good description or at least appearance of what their eye looks like. So I say, hey, it kind of looks like a little bit of this little inflammation dots that you're getting on your cornea right there. And at least showing those patients there has been a good tool for us, because one thing that we've, I think, just really gotten lucky on, and something that we're hopefully going to be able to get here in the future, but as a myographer. I don't know. I just must be A+ at explaining MGD to my patients because they completely buy it. But I think at least showing them those pictures as well now too is getting them to buy in a little bit more.
Again, this is not an infomercial for Peeq, so I want to make sure that I do this disclosure. We've been really impressed with Kyle because I'll be honest, he sells more boxes than anybody else. And whatever he's saying with regards to how he's communicating is very effective. And like, we have enough data around the country to just say, I have no idea what you do, but whatever you're doing is right, because people are buying what you do. And then compliance. One of the things that we have heard from your patients regarding compliance is that you do a really good job with follow-ups. Would you talk a little bit about how your compliance protocol around follow-ups, like what you do? And I think it's a little bit different than what a lot of other offices do.
Yeah. So what we do is we kind of actually treat it almost like a progressive, where you're that first time progressive wearer. And usually about 2 or 3 weeks after they've been using their products, what we'll do is we'll just call them. We'll just say, hey, how are the products going for you? Are they working okay? Do you maybe want to get something else that's a little bit stronger here as well too? So yeah, and that was something that I actually learned a little bit from my advisors as well too, because I kind of had a little couple questions about it, because I'm like, okay, hey, how can we follow up with these patients to make sure that they're using the products, to make sure that they're getting that symptomatic relief that we had pretty much promised to them. And patients have been really happy about it, where they're calling us back and they answer the call and they say, hey, like, thanks so much for calling in. Like, it's great that you actually care about us here and you're truthfully taking time out of your day just to see how I'm doing there. So I think at least with that, just kind of building off that more, that's at least where we're just fortunate enough where we have that extra time where we can make it a little bit more personalizable or personable, at least for all those patients.
Yeah, that makes sense. I do want to make sure if others have questions, feel free to either put it in the chat or jump in and ask the question. I am the host, but I'm not the only one that can ask questions, particularly when we go down the path of talking about treatments or reviews. Obviously, some of the doctors on the call might want some follow-up. So I am going to change gears a little bit and go back to one of the things you talked about with regards to the nature of your patients. So you do have a number of patients that speak Spanish and may not speak any English or very little English. Tell us a little bit about, it's so impactful in the reason you're an optometrist, plus where you practice, all those sorts of things. Tell us a little bit about how you have perceived the need in the Omaha area with regards to the need for Spanish services.
So yeah, I think at least in Omaha, one thing that is really unknown for a lot of people that don't live in the Midwest or have any experience with what goes on in the Midwest, but we've got a lot of meat packing plants and a lot of the lower end jobs that unfortunately, not really unfortunately, but thankfully, a lot of the immigrants are going to take those jobs, and they're hard workers and they know that they're going to do a really excellent job on those. So yeah, and that was one thing, at least in school, that I had recognized, at least growing up in the Omaha community. I saw that there was a massive need there. And I think a lot of that comes from at least working for my dad. So he had, I know this is completely way out in left field, but he has no experience in eye care or whatnot. So he had a chicken business. And naturally, a lot of his accounts were down in South Omaha because that's where his business was at. So that's where I got kind of a lot of at least experience just hand-on growing up in high school, is just seeing, okay, hey, there's a lot of these people here that don't know any English all that much, and they at least need someone to communicate with in Spanish there too. And that was kind of at least one thing too that we looked at least when we were doing our business plan, is we did a pretty deep dive at least into the South Omaha community there on 24th. Ideally, what we really would have loved to do is put a practice right there in South Omaha. But at least with the conversations that I had with my mother and my other team member that was an existing team member of the prior optical shop that we had in the past, she would have had no issue with it because she lives in Council Bluffs, but we live all the way out in West Omaha, and that is about a 20 or 30-minute drive, at least for us out there too. But so what we decided is we said, okay, hey, let's do something central where they can at least take, a 10-minute drive max, sometimes 15-minute max, and come here into kind of more that central location and help out that community too. And at least with that, to kind of show that we care for them too, we've become members of the Hispanic Chamber of Commerce. And then we've participated in a bunch of health fairs and Cinco de Mayo parades, at least for that community there too. So, and with them, the biggest thing is getting your face out there and them being able to put a face to a name as well.
So that's really interesting when you talk about some of the ways you've done marketing. So you're located, for those of you who aren't from Omaha, he's located almost directly in the middle of the city. The city grew out from the river about 10 blocks every decade. So it goes out to about 200th Street at this point. And then it's a gridded system. So there's a south and a north that's based on a street called Dodge Street. So like, it is very directional. This is not like a neighborhood. It is literally like the area south and east is the part he's talking about. So within that, you talked about doing marketing and finding people where they are. I know from working with my wife and her clinic and other clinics around the country that being able to identify patients and their patient needs is a big deal. How did you, how have you interacted with regards to market research and understood that it's the Hispanic Chamber of Commerce and the Cinco de Mayo parade as opposed to something else? What was that insight? What were some of the things that you were doing?
So yeah, I think at least with that, a lot of where we decided to market to that population just came from a lot of experience that we had as a family with that population too. So like I said, my dad had his business down there. He was down there for 15 years. So we kind of understood at least how they would get media. And at least the one thing that I've told a lot of other docs too that have asked me about cold starting, the biggest thing with marketing is you can go down a black hole in that, where you could just keep spending tons and tons and tons and tons of money and see no return on investment. So at least with us, what we tried to do is we at least tried to do things that were concrete, that were cheap, that would still get a good name out there. And then once that was established, then doing other things that maybe would cost a little bit more once you're kind of more well known. So at least even before we opened, what I did is radio is extremely popular with Hispanics. So I got hooked up with a guy that has just like a talk radio show. And before I started, I just went on there and just did interviews, all in Spanish, pretty much all unfiltered as well. I mean, there were a couple times where we did come prepared with kind of questions about, like, hey, can diabetes affect my eyes? When should my kid be getting an eye exam? What are common conditions that may be affecting your eyes with the types of work that you do as well too? So that was a huge hit where before we even started, we had patients call us and say, hey, I want to book an appointment. And I'm like, hey, whoa, let's pump the brakes here a little bit. We're not even open here full time. So that advertising in schools as well too, that's been huge. At least before we opened, I took probably like 3 or 4 hours where I just went to local schools and just dropped off my business card. And I said, hey, here's a business card in English. Here's a business card in Spanish. Whatever you need, we can help you out. If mom and dad only speaking Spanish, we've got you covered. If, you only need, or say if you have Medicaid insurance, that's one other unique thing about our clinic is we're one of the few providers in Omaha that used to take all three. We don't take the new one in Molina, and I've got some pretty choice words, at least for the Nebraska government, in terms of getting all those patients all switched over from one type of insurance to a new one. But anyway, yeah, I mean, I think that's kind of the biggest thing when it comes to marketing is figuring out, okay, are you going to get your true return on investment here? And what we would really kind of base it off of is, okay, a patient books an appointment, no insurance. Is that going to cover at least half of it or a fourth of it?
I'm going to change back to dry eye just because we've got a question from the crowd, i.e. my wife has asked, Kyle, what do you have in your dry eye boxes? So yeah, at least to answer your question there, Cheryl, we've got two types. So we have kind of a basic type that just has a heat mask, a Peeq eyelid cleanser, and then Sustain Complete preservative free. So at least in terms of the eye drop there, that has been kind of my workhorse eye drop that I like for maintenance therapy. And that's what I describe to patients too, is I say, hey, this eye drop is just maintenance therapy. It's only going to address your symptoms temporarily. It's not going to fix your symptoms for you. And then in terms of the heat mask, it's a brooder mask. We had sold those before. So at least kind of some extra background is we had partnered with Dry Eye Rescue, and we were just selling kind of random products that I'd gotten a lot of experience with, at least at school. I tried a couple of them out, and some of them I was a fan of. Other ones I wasn't a fan of. But ultimately just decided on the brooder mask. But then, yeah, when you had approached us as well, I said, okay, hey, what a better idea to market ourselves on a box. Because that was one thing that we had struggled with, at least with Dry Eye Rescue, is we would give patients the products, but there would be nothing that would show that it came from Truly Visualize Optical. And at least with the boxes, we have our logo. I can even grab one here as well too. But yeah, so we've got our logo on here as well. And I mean, it's a cool logo. It's got a nice little play as well too. So Veo actually means I see in Spanish too. So that's why I was like, yeah, let's go ahead and do that logo right there too. But anyway, in terms of the products there too. So yeah, so we've got the lid scrub here, and I usually open it up just exactly like this to the patient. And then I show it to them and I say, hey, here, I'll kind of bring this down a little bit here too. But here's your eye drops here. Use these 3 times a day. And my exact terminology is use it around your meal times. That's an easy schedule for you to use because you should be eating 3 meals a day. And then at least with the heat mask in there, I kind of show it to them. I just say, hey, pop it in your microwave, 10, 15 seconds, start at 10 seconds. If it's not hot enough or it's too hot for your hands, it's going to be too hot for your face. And then put it over your closed eyes for 5 minutes right before you go to bed. Most female patients, what I'll also tell them too, is it feels like you're going to a spa.
So you might as well at least get some aesthetic pleasure and also treat what you got going on in terms of your ocular surface. And then the Peeq lid cleanser there. This is at least the basic box right here. So in our kind of advanced boxes, and this is something we've been playing around here for the last month or so, is just trying to kind of figure out what we can do. So in our advanced boxes, we have all those products there, but then we also have eye vitamins, so PRN eye vitamins, and I'm a big fan of those just because of the concentration of that 3-to-1 DPA to EPA, and then also just Lumify. So any cosmetic fixes with any redness that you would get, which obviously we all know is a sign of dry eye disease there too. One thing that we've been talking as an office that we would maybe like to include in that advanced box would maybe be like a Wava. That way they can actually have a way of cleaning their eyelids as opposed to me just saying, put it in the sponge or put it in your fingers, close your eyes, and then do that for about a minute.
Cheryl asked, what do you recommend more often? How do you sell more of, what do you sell more of, basic or advanced? I'm assuming basic.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so basic. And a lot of the issues too that we run into, where I had mentioned that we do see a lot of Medicaid patients. Unfortunately, at least socioeconomic wise, they just aren't the most well off. They had one unfortunate accident that just kind of put them over the deep end or anything like that too. So we've partnered with Care Credit, at least to give them that option if they can't afford the box there either. But yeah, I would say we sell the basic ones the most, just because what I'm doing with the basic ones is just getting them started at least on some maintenance therapy. And that's what I explain to patients too, at least in the exam lane, is I say, hey, this is what's going on. I don't want you to come back in here in a year or 2 years and then you say, I can't really see out of my glasses. And our issue is that your prescription isn't right. It's just that you didn't take serious consideration that your dry eye disease could get worse. So I think at least in terms also of maybe where we're at and giving the boxes, we may be doing it a little bit overboard, but I'd rather overtreat it and be preventative. That way it doesn't get any worse. And when you at least explain that to patients, they appreciate that. They say, hey, there's not a lot of doctors that are actually going to say that and say, hey, we're looking out for you right now and also in the future.
That's interesting. One of the things that we have noticed, so we've audited about half of our customers now, so about 50 offices. And one of the things that is really differentiates those who do a lot and those who don't is that in-chair conversation. Can you talk a little bit about how you talk to patients about whatever you're recommending? So again, I'm not trying to sell Peeq. Like if this is glasses, sunglasses, that's fine. But this is one of the things that we get the most questions about. For example, I have a hard time getting somebody who's on VSP, Medicaid, fill in the blank, to do something that isn't paid for by whatever they're coming in as their third party payer. How do you get them? How do you get your patient? I don't want to say convince your patient, but what are the types of things that you're doing to provide that assurity that causes them to take action?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing for us, and at least as an office in general, is we just love educating our patients. So that's pretty much kind of what I boil it down to the patient. And with me saying that, I've got that extra time, yeah, I can definitely probably explain a little bit more than what some other docs just may have just because they're pressed for time. So what I do is I actually do my exams intentionally different. So instead of starting with the refraction, I actually start with the pictures of the back part of their eye, and then I go straight into pretest and then anterior seg. And then when I'm done with anterior seg, if they have any sort of dryness, at least just looking with white light, what I tell them is I say, hey, at least look in here at your eyelids. And I'm verbalizing this too. So as I'm checking the patient, I'm speaking out loud and saying, oh, yep, seeing some new blood vessel growth here that shouldn't be there. Seeing a couple glands that are clogged and capped and not working the way that we need them to. I'm seeing some glands that might be completely atrophied that we may never recover. If there's any debris on there, then I, note and say, hey, you got some little kind of crusties here. Do you ever wake up with eye boogers in the corner of your eye? And yeah, I know at least maybe my lingo is a little bit awkward there or a little bit odd, but I just try to make it as basic for the patient so they can understand what's going on as well too. And then after I get done with at least checking out with white light, what I tell them is I say, hey, let's put a little orange dye or yellow orangish dye into your eye. to get a little bit more of a whole picture of what's going on here for you. Obviously, I can see that there's changes with white light, but we need to check what your coverage of your tears are and what the quality of your tears are. And at least those two words that I've been saying, I think it makes sense for patients. And then, you put the dye in there, you look, and then you just describe to them what you're seeing. A lot of times that's when I'll get that picture and I'll bring it up. Other times with some patients, if they know they have dry eye, then they just kind of want the explanation. So when I put the dye in there, I always tell all patients that, hey, a most normal individual, this dye is going to stick on your eye for 10 seconds. At least looking at your eyes here, it might be that's it evaporating in 8 seconds. So in terms of kind of treatment wise, maybe we don't need you to have to do those artificial tears 3 times a day. Maybe we can get good success by just doing it 2 times a day there. But say if their T-bud is now, 2, they've got tons of SPK right there, then yeah, my conversation's a whole lot different where I'm saying you got to be really, really consistent. And what I tell them too is I say, being consistent, doing it every day, because there's no cure for dry eye. And I really lay that kind of foundation for a lot of patients too. So I say, once you're doing it consistently, once you feel better, then don't stop it entirely, but wean yourself off of it. Kind of do it, say, every other day. And then keep doing that, unfortunately, for the rest of your life. And some patients will kind of look at me and they'll kind of gawk at you. And you're like, well, I'm kind of helping you out is ultimately what we say there at the end. And with those patients that do have pushback, what we ultimately tell them is some patients have approached us and they're like, hey, we feel like you're trying to sell us something. And what we tell them is we say, hey, we're not trying to sell you anything. We're just trying to educate you and give you the best treatment that we would want to give the best treatment for any patient, regardless of what your insurance is, regardless of how much money you have, regardless of anything else. We just want to make sure that you have crisp, clean, consistent vision.
Interesting. All right. So I'm going to you've made this recommendation. They say, yeah, I'm interested in that. This is a little tactical, but I'm pretty tactical in the way I think about things. Do you hand them a box at that point? Do you say, here you go? Do you finish the exam and hand them the box as they're leaving? Like what does that process look like with regards to when and where you kind of interact? How does your staff interact? Like what does the rest of the process with regards to the patient look like?
So yeah, that's been one thing that has been kind of changing here since we've brought on a new employee here at our front desk. So at least in the past, what we would do, and she's still been a really good spokesperson for us, but one of our opticians has pretty bad dry eye disease. So we've tried a lot of these products on her. She uses all of them a lot. So she's at least been kind of our spokesperson for our clinic. So I think that's one thing that's really important, especially bringing these products on, is obviously, we know that the doctor is going to be fully invested onto them and is going to recommend them for all the patients that he or she thinks is going to benefit from them. But having someone else in your staff that's truly bought in, that can be kind of your dry eye spokesperson for when the doctor isn't available or when patients have other questions, has been a huge key for us. And we have patients nowadays that just come in and just buy Bruder masks sometimes, or just buy eye drops because they're out. And I think a lot of that's been at least that enforcement, whether it's from myself or from Janine, who is our optician, that's kind of our dry eye spokesperson there as well too. And then what I've done, so I actually stole this. So I worked at Dr. Bateman's office in Lincoln here, and I stole this directly from him. But it's a little checklist right here. And then what I have right here, so at least patient handoff wise, how it's been going is I circle. So I circle heat mask, there's Peeq that's listed on here, and then there's PFAS, which is preservative-free artificial tears. So when I circle all 3 of those, then our front desk person knows, okay, I need to give them the box. And then what she will do, we're kind of getting her a little bit better trained at it, but it was pretty much me that was doing it, at least in the past, is when they're checking out and we're getting that payment. So I dilate all my new patients as well too. But at least when they're done with the exam and we're getting that payment as well, that's when we'll show them the products and we'll talk about them. We'll open the box up. We'll say, hey, scan the QR code. It gives you more information about how to use the products there too. And pretty much what we do is we say, hey, we'll follow up with you here in a couple weeks after this here too, just to see how you're doing. So that's at least kind of the handoff that we have there. At least for now, I mean, it's worked pretty okay, I think. I mean, I wish there was one thing that we could do to maybe make that a little bit easier to get everyone kind of all on the same page, where I'd have, maybe say like a fancy little guy that I'd put in the patient file or so. But I mean, at least currently right now, that I think are kind of the two biggest things, is having that spokesperson, and then at least just having other people in your office just kind of understand the protocol.
So you talked a little bit about kind of three different images that I think are interesting. You talked a little bit about the idea that dry eye is not a disease that you're ever done treating. You've talked kind of around the idea of compliance, and then you've talked about follow-ups. One of the things I want to ask as a young doctor is, do you think the conversation about dry eye, do you think the conversation around compliance has changed when you hear and see older doctors that you're talking to talk about these things? Like, do you think you have a different perspective, or do you think it's come to light because of COVID or some of the other things that you've seen? Tell me a little bit more about why this is a focus for you, that not every optometrist we talk to even thinks about this.
Yeah, and this is something that I actually discussed with all my friends quite a bit too. So something that we've just recently brought on is we've been doing a lot more amniotic membranes here too. So at least treating that dry eye as well. And one of my friends has been kind of a good pioneer of at least getting us all started with that too. But yeah, I mean, that's one thing that I think is totally underutilized in terms of just optometry. But what I can say why it's underutilized is a lot of at least the optometrists that are working just may be in settings where they can't bring it on. For example, they're working in a big box store like a Lens Crafters or a Pearl Vision, or America's Best, or they've just worked at an established practice where, kind of like what you were saying as well too, Tom, is it may be just be an older owner. The older doctor just may not have bought into the dry eye. But I think, at least for me, and at least just being younger, a lot of our schooling that we had was more medical based. And that was something that at least gravitated me, is, okay, yeah, wear glasses and contacts, but also what's the health of your eye? And I think that's kind of also why we do things intentionally in the exam lane there too. But anyway, yeah, I mean, I think that's kind of the biggest thing, is they just may not have the time, or they just may not truly understand it. And that's kind of one other thing that surprises me a lot of times too, is, I mean, at least when you really go digging deep into dry eye, I mean, just the DEWS 2 study, there's a couple other research articles as well too, that just read those, and it gives you a whole lot more insight on that dry eye just isn't in your eyes, it's multifactorial, where you've got to involve all of your body. You've got to make sure that your diet is right. And patients have been surprised. They're like, how do you as an eye doctor know about like all these diet things? And I'm like, well, it's important. What you put in your body is going to also, you're going to see it in your eyes there as well too.
Cheryl asked, what is your preferred amniotic membrane?
So I have experience at least with 3 of them. We've done a Procura, we've done an OptiSite, and then the company that my friend got me set up with is called Ophthalogix. I actually have loved the Ophthalogix one the most. And I don't know if maybe because I'm biased because my friend is one of the guys that has kind of gotten that up and running. But they have one out on the market, and we did it on one of our opticians as well too. But it's called an Aurora. So it's a 10 millimeter amniotic membrane, but there's a pupil slit in there. So you can at least keep vision while you're undergoing the procedure. And then what I also do, so with those patients that are at least getting amniotic membranes, the way that I describe it to them is I say, it's fertilizer for your eye. We're going to go ahead and put this on your eye. We're going to regenerate all of these dead or dying cells here and make it where you're feeling a whole lot more. And then what I also tell them after that is, hey, that's not the end, at least, of the treatment. We need to keep these healthy tears now on your surface. So what I'm going to elect for is at least punctal plugging them up, more of the dissolvable type. I don't like the silicone type. There's some studies out there that show that silicone actually increases inflammation in the body, where there's been, it's a weird study, but my friend sent it to me, where there was, I think it was like a small study where there were a couple female patients that had gotten breast augmentation, and it was silicone. And with that, what they had noticed over the next couple of years is that they had started getting more dry eye issues. So I read into that a little bit more, and I said, yeah, let's stay away from the silicone plugs there. Let's do more of the collagen dissolvable ones there. And at least telling patients kind of exactly what I said there, it's made sense, at least for them. I haven't had really much pushback, and those patients are truthfully, they're miserable. They don't have good consistent vision. They don't know what to do. So at least talking to someone. I had a patient that we just put an amniotic membrane on, the Optologics, and she's an accountant, so obviously right now she's super busy. But when she came in and visited us for her final eye, she was like, I don't know what you've done, but I can actually finally now see my computer consistently. I can see my TV guide here. Like, I don't feel nervous that I'm making a mistake on someone's books anymore now too. So that's at least been good for us as well too.
Interesting. So another question that we've gotten frequently is, and frequently is probably wrong, but the question is, and you mentioned earlier, you want to get a myographer. If you were going to go more heavily into areas of practice, what are pieces of equipment that you will be buying or would buy? So whether it's dry eye or another type of practice, what are some of the things that are on your radar screen? And then what are some of the things that you bought and you're like, I wish I hadn't bought that as a cold starter?
Thankfully, there is no piece of equipment that I have had regrets buying.
Okay.
And that's at least been really, really great. And I was fortunate enough, at least, where I didn't have to lease the equipment. I had some extra funds just kind of laying around and sold those stocks, and that was kind of what at least cooped up most of our equipment for us. But anyway, what we have is so just an autorefractor, autokeratometer, auto lensometer, and a regular lensometer too. A Maestro 2, which I've loved. I mean, it's nice having that fundus photo and at least OCT all in one, because there's so many capabilities with it. I had a lot of experience using that machine at one of the practices that, or at one of my internships that I did when I was in school. And then just like a cheap visual field machine. But yeah, I mean, I think at least going forward, especially with how much we're focused on dry eye, getting a myographer so I can actually truthfully show patients, hey, this is how much gland atrophy you have. This is what normal looks like. This is what your eye looks like. And obviously it's not normal. That, and then more of like an IPL, I think too. And I've had conversations with a couple individuals, whether it be In Mode or whether it be Luminous. But we just can't make it work right now. And that's pretty much what I tell the reps. I say, hey, like, it's going to be great once we can make it work, but we're a cold start practice. I understand what you're trying to do and how much money we would see from that, but that's way too much of a risk for me. So what we're hoping is, I think here in the next 3 or 4, maybe 5 years, is we'll be able to bring those two pieces of equipment on as well.
Cool. So we've got a little over 10 minutes. I want to be thoughtful about time and make sure that I ask, are there things that the audience wants to ask? Cheryl's been littering us with questions. One question, so I do a lot of these interviews on Zoom, but rarely with optometrists, usually with other folks. So the question that I want to ask, well, I'm going to ask 2 questions. First question, what is a unique aspect or untold gem of something you do that you've never seen anyone else do, or that you stole and very few people do, that you're like, this is super good, and aren't afraid to share it? Because if it's super good and it's,
I think
shareable.
I think the way that we do our exams, or at least the way that I intentionally do the exams there. So I stole that one. I'll be honest, I stole that one directly from Dr. Bateman. Because and patients sometimes will look at you and they're like, are you going to do the glasses procedure here? Are you going to do the glasses portion? And then what I basically explain to those patients is I say, hey, obviously you've noticed that I'm doing something differently here, and I do it differently for a reason. And it's to show that coming in for an eye exam is more just than a pair of glasses or a pair of contacts. It's what's the health of the front part of your eye, and also what's the health of the back part of your eye there too. So that's at least why with all new patients, we dilate them. And that's what I explain to them too, is I say, hey, I've never seen you. I don't know what your old doc has ever seen. Maybe he says you're healthy, but I want to make sure that you're healthy as well.
Interesting. All right. So my last question is always, what can the community do for you? So what can Peeq and the people within Peeq do to help you out?
I mean, you guys have done a lot for us, honestly, too. I mean, getting us the logo, that's something that I know it doesn't seem like a lot, but that was something that we struggled with. We didn't know how to make a good logo, what to do with a good logo. I think at least the other thing too, that we could maybe more of these webinars. I mean, this is one thing that I love just as a doc. Obviously, as you guys can tell, I definitely like talking a lot. But just getting good conversations back and forth, and sharing these ideas. Because yeah, I mean, for someone that's cold start, we'll take as many of the ideas as we can. Or someone that's maybe established, maybe they just want to change it up a little bit and kind of see, okay, hey, you know, Dr. So-and-so is doing it this way. Maybe let's try it that way. So I think that would be one thing that, you know, I would maybe like to see, at least from the community more so, is more of these webinars, more kind of these interactive meetings as well too.
Cool. That's a really good segue to what I was going to say is some of my conclusions. So we do have 3 more webinars scheduled. March 26th, April 23rd, May 21st. The next one, so in March, we're going to talk a little bit about specialty lens practices, so myopia and sclerals. Part of what we're going to talk about, again, is just things and best practices that we're seeing with offices. We've asked a couple doctors if they can participate in that. In April, we're going to talk about aesthetics and beauty. So some of that conversation will be around cosmetic products, false eyelashes, things of that nature. That's a really common thing when we are out talking to optometrists, that people are wanting to go more down, I'm going to say, the med spa path. So we have Jackie Munson from Fort Collins, who will be joining us to talk a little bit about her practice, which incorporates a lot of interesting things. And then we're going to go deeper on dry eye, and we're going to have Todd Cohen, who's sort of a national expert on dry eye, come and talk on May 21st. So, you know, our goal, and I would put this out there, our goal is to start sharing best practices beyond sort of the doctoring best practices. What we have seen in our interaction is you all do a great job of talking to each other about how to be better doctors, how to be better scientists, how to better understand the issues of the eye. But sometimes the business practices around that to ensure that your patients are compliant with what they need, et cetera, aren't always the priority. So we're trying to find folks that have gone a little bit deeper on something that we're getting questions about, and just saying, how does that work? How are you doing that? That's really interesting. So, you know, our first was Kyle Niemann today, and he was talking a little bit about cold starting a practice. I hope you learned a little bit, knowing, you know, Kyle is right at the beginning of his doctor journey, but I think he's doing a lot of really cool stuff that a lot of offices should be thinking about. You know, 2 things that I learned on this is the little card that you're talking about that you got from Dr. Bateman. A lot of offices don't do that. That's a big issue. It leads to a conversion rate that's much higher. So good job. And then just the way that you've reversed your exams. Again, I think that's really smart. That's a thing that allows you to have conversations, I think, at different times in the process that does benefit your patient and does lead to greater compliance. So, I mean, that's just me as an outsider sitting here saying I talk to a lot of doctors, and I really appreciate you being here. So, Kyle, thank you. All of you who are on this call, thank you. Those of you who will watch the tape, thank you. So, great job, everybody. And we'll leave you for the evening. Cheers.